If I can consciously channel my aggression and my darker shadow into something consensual that allows you to release or claim power, aggression, feelings of worth and unworthiness. And if you can play on that level, that's pretty amazing. And it allows our darker but normal human feelings to be exercised and exorcised.
Using the force for good rather than evil.
I mean, George Lucas taught us that in 1976.
He sure did.
I'm Cyndi Darnell, and welcome to The Erotic Philosopher, the podcast where we examine and explore sex and relationships through social, cultural, political, and other lenses, and discover ways to solve some very diverse and stimulating erotic quandaries. All episodes are of an erotic nature, and this episode in particular comes with a content note about aggression and power exchange. Today's guest is David Ortman. David is a licensed psychotherapist, sex therapist, keynote speaker, and author with private practices in New York City and San Francisco. He's recognized as one of the foremost scholars and activists in the growing freedom of sexual and erotic expression movement. His areas of expertise and passion include erotic power exchange, BDSM, kink, fetish, and leather sexualities, concepts and theories of masculinity, male sexual diversity, and alternative relationship paradigms. David regularly serves as a consultant, educator, and expert witness on the nature and use of power in sex and society, and the psychology, scope, process, and ritual of consensual BDSM for civil and criminal cases. David Ortman, welcome. Welcome to The Erotic Philosopher. I'm glad that we could finally make time for this. I will give listeners a little bit of context into how I know you, that we met probably about 4 years ago now, I guess, through a mutual friend of ours, Dominic Davies in London, who's also a sex therapist. And I had heard of you because of your book, Sexual Outsiders, and your extraordinary work as a therapist and also a sex therapist who specializes in working with kinky people. So maybe, David, can we start there? Because that's really something that you specialize in above and beyond most of the other things. That's sort of really your jam, right?
Yeah, that is definitely my specialty. I mean, what falls into the bucket we'll call kink, I think, has gotten broader since I've been doing this work. But yeah, that is my specialty.
Yeah, so I think, I mean, what is it that you think, and especially because the kind of kink stuff that you specialize in is really unique, and and I think certainly probably in the last 5 to 10 years, kink has become a bit more mainstream. Dare I say it, with 50 Shades of Grey, which let's not even go into that, but but it has put kink on the mainstream map. But you also take it a step further and specialize in working with clients who are beyond bondage 101, right?
Oh yeah.
Well, I mean, what inspired you to kind of to work, I guess, to serve that community in particular? Because this is not stuff that you learned at therapy school. This is stuff that you bring a certain kind of essence, a certain quality that makes you exceptional because of that. Because you can't learn this stuff in therapy school. It's too conservative. It's too square. Especially
when I went to therapy school, and that was back in 1999. But I have clients and friends going to therapy school now, and not much has changed. So not only did I not learn it in therapy school, I learned the opposite. People were very eager to talk about race and class and gender and, well, back then kind of talk about sexual orientation, but not really. I talk about what was wrong, really focusing on what is wrong with people, what is wrong with the brain.
Yeah.
It was a very rigid kind of construct. And when I would bring up questions about sex, which I've been fascinated by sexuality my whole life, and coincidentally, I've also had people come to me at various points and ask me questions about sex when I wasn't even aware of what sex really was.
Yeah.
Like friends at school in 8th grade, who were going on their first date. And I'm like, why are you coming to me?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something that you and I share in common. I had the same thing, a sort of very strong interest in sex from probably about the same, puberty years. But, for me, the interest wasn't carnal as much as it was just sheer fascination. But
Right.
I was always facilitating those conversations too.
Isn't it funny, like how we get shown, if we're paying attention, maybe what our path is meant to be or where our gifts lie really early?
Yes. And did you find, I mean, we're going into this, especially with the kink thing, because of the stigma, and again, like that, when you're at therapy school, and I agree, like back in the day and still now, we're looking at therapy broadly through a social justice lens, which is important. And what's also important is how overlooked sex is outside of sexual identity. LGBTQ stuff is now being incorporated at a much higher level. But sex practices and how people feel about what they do in bed or what they don't do in bed, or how they construct their relationships and power dynamics, this is still not taught in therapy programs. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's primarily fear. And I mean, we can easily talk about where that fear comes from, but I think, we're living in a country that, really is based on beliefs in certain kinds of religion, certain kinds of gods that mirror kind of a punishing patriarchal, and I'm not talking about consensual fun, the punishing patriarchal.
Yeah.
More sex is seen as, at best, something private. And at worst, something that people are ashamed of and feel outside of, or in some way are looking at themselves and comparing their experience to that of others, or that of what we see in film or in pop music or in pop culture, and coming up short.
Yeah.
Not being good enough, not being long enough, not being hard enough, not being wet enough.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm an addict. Am I masturbating too much? Am I not masturbating enough? Oh my God, I'm not coming. She's not coming. Stop. Let's bring the conversation, take a breath, and focus on pleasure. And I think that's part of why I relate so much to your work. Is it is really quite simple. Life goes well for people when they're expanding and not contracting.
Yeah.
When they're coming from a place of love rather than a place of fear.
Right.
And I really think you can distill all of the primary mess of human emotions and consciousness down to, where are you coming from? Love or fear? You coming from contraction, or are you coming from expansion? And for me, my life goes better when I'm coming from expansion or love.
Yeah.
Regardless of what other people think about what I'm doing or how I'm doing it, or the path is not really there for any of us. I think we have to kind of forge it. Therapists, I mean.
Yeah. And so it's interesting to me, the permission for pleasure. What happens when folks want to explore sex outside the margins, whether they're heterosexual or gay or queer or whatever. And increasingly, those kind of binaries and levels are not disappearing, but they're getting diluted as more and more people are choosing not to bother labeling themselves through an identity, and more wanting to have nuanced discussions about what they do rather than what they are, And so that's where I'm interested in where your work fits in. And can you describe what the impetus was behind your book, Sexual Outsiders? Because that's, to my knowledge, it's the only book of its kind in the world.
I think so. I mean, I think you're right. It is the only kind of its book in the world. The impetus behind it was basically part of the impetus why I went into specializing in sexuality and then specializing in working with people who were kinky, because there weren't, when I became licensed, when I was studying, not only did I experience being shut down around sexual inquiry and questions about sexual health and sexual pleasure in grad school, but when I got out, this was in San Francisco, where I think we're talking about kind of the hotbed of sexual exploration and progressive thinking around sex and relationships and connection and pleasure. And I knew a lot of kinky people. I am a kinky people. And there were no therapists. I shouldn't say there were no therapists. There were about 5 or 6 therapists who were out about the fact that they knew about this alternative form of sexuality, and perhaps they even practiced it, but they welcomed clients who are of this orientation or of this practice or of this erotic mindset into their practice in a way that didn't focus on their sexuality as the problem.
And so that's really the key thing, because I think that's what still, therapy training has not quite caught up to speed yet on that I think as therapists, we are trained to look for problems rather than to look for solutions. And often when people come for work in this arena with sex problems, quote unquote, the problem is often not even a problem at all. It's about the struggle is them trying to fit into a world that is not made for them.
Absolutely. And that's why I picked the title Sexual Outsiders, because it reminded me of S.E. Hinton's book, The Outsiders, and the wonderful movie adaptation that was done in the 80s.
Yeah.
That made, it made stars out of all of those teen heartthrobs. And it coming of age in the 80s, just as a quick aside, helped me get in touch with my own sexuality much faster than I think it would have if I were raised in any other time, because all of the boys in my school, not really me, because I was more self-conscious at that age, were wearing these tight nylon shorts and crop tops cut off, at their top of their rib cage, and girls were wearing, leotards and strappy workout. It was a very physical, carnal presentation of sexuality, and everything was tight
and bright, lots of neon colors.
Oh, right, the neon, I forgot about that. And it was really erotic and arousing for me to see these beautiful nubile young bodies so just proudly and confidently displayed at probably the most awkward time in all of our lives, which was the middle of adolescence.
Yeah.
So this book, The Outsiders, is very much about, the movie is all about tight leather jackets and Levi's and ripped t-shirts. It's very much of the era, which is the 80s interpretation of the 50s. That movie always resonated with me because it really looks at what it's like to be different, what it's like to be poor, what it's like to be on the wrong side of the tracks, and how hard it is to get up from that and rise, as Maya Angelou used to say. But if we do that, I really felt the parallel in my own life, coming into my own sexual awakening and realizing that I had a rare opportunity to possibly put myself in a position to help others have that and to not feel so outside. I mean, perhaps we are all still sexual outsiders, but maybe we don't feel so alone.
Yeah. And I think that that's the thing. It's not, even I know in my own sort of sexual, what do you want to call it? I don't know, process, discovery, journey. I don't know, any of those words. There's not an end point. It just keeps going. And, if I had thought about how I imagined myself perhaps at 14, 15, even though I never, ever, ever was one of those girls who fantasized about getting married and having babies, that was never my agenda. There was a part of me that I think somehow subconsciously accepted that would be my fate, and that I would inevitably just end up married in suburbia with a couple of children and, kind of living the dream. And of course that didn't happen. And I am absolutely fine with that. I have no disappointment about that at all. And because it ended up being a conscious decision. There were opportunities for me to have had that over the years if I had wanted it, and I actively refused it every step of the way. And so coming to that peace with being a sexual outsider in whatever form that takes, It's my experience is it doesn't end. Like it just it's constantly evolving. It's a constant state of motion because your sexuality is in a constant state of motion. I'm not the same person I was when I was 15. And I'm not even the same person I was when I first arrived in New York City, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a different version, similar, but there are bits and pieces that have changed. And as I get older, I expect that's going to change too. So, what's been your observation of how your kinky clients have evolved since the time you've been working in this field, especially where you've become such a trusted community member in this work?
Wow, thank you. That's beautiful to hear. How has it evolved? God, there's so many different ways to answer that question. There's a part of me that wants to say that it's become easier.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think it necessarily has become easier. I think I still have, about 10 trusted people that I can refer clients to with confidence.
Mm.
That's not much more than was available in San Francisco when I started this work. There was Jack Moore and Bill Hankin and Dossie Easton, and these are, I wouldn't call them the Gandalfs of our profession because these are the people who really took the risks. I mean, we stand on some pretty broad shoulders, but I don't think there are that many more of us now asking these questions on this path, this journey, as you say, asking the difficult questions, about, a non-binary, more fluid world. Everything is constantly in a state of motion and evolving.
Yeah.
I think when somebody comes to therapy, regardless of the presenting problem, and even that term will show you how psychology and social work and therapy view people. Like, what is the presenting problem? You must have walked through my door because you're totally fucked up.
Yeah.
So let's fix you like you're an automobile. Well, it doesn't work that way. And clients can become very anxious. Clients of a certain temperament and personality who want to see graphs and charts and results and how much progress am I going to make in 4 weeks? I don't know how much progress you're going to make in 4 weeks. Why don't you drop whatever mask you're wearing that gets you through the bullshit outside and be real with me, because I'm going to be real with you because that's the only way this works.
Yeah.
And I've had clients call me years later and say, thank you for just bringing yourself into the process. I mean, I don't make my problems theirs, or, therapists have such weird boundaries around what they call disclosure or self-disclosure.
Right.
Sometimes it's appropriate to bring myself to the work when a client is talking about something that I've personally found solutions to for myself and perhaps have learned other solutions from other clients. So, there's this phrase in the 90s, like each one teach one, or each one reach one. Like if you are the tool in this work, meaning we are the tool.
Yeah.
So we can't get that message from the profession and then get the message of be this colorless, shapeless, kind of emotionless cipher. That's a mixed message, and it doesn't work.
Yeah. And I've sort of thought, lately that traditional therapy, whether it's, psychology, social work, counseling, any of those disciplines that we get trained in to then go on and specialize in sex therapy, increasingly my observation is that those mental health counseling variation training programs are probably not the best places to train sex therapists. Because I think the skills that we need is to work with sexuality, it's a whole different set of knowledge and awareness. Do you have a sense of why that is? Why these institutions would be holding on to not incorporating, the let's say the philosophy of being a sexual outsider?
It's about maintaining the status quo. We give a lot of lip service to social justice, which is a term that means a number of different things. I think we give a lot of lip service to change, but I think most people, and then thus institutions and society, are really more invested in maintaining the status quo, even if it doesn't work. And I find this sometimes with clients too, and it's a realization for them that you're not moving toward what's comfortable. You're just moving toward what's familiar. even if it's excruciating.
Yeah, and that is so true with clients. And then even at that macro level, we don't move towards what's comfortable. We move towards what's familiar, even if it hurts us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I mean, until the people who are asking the questions that are challenging and maybe don't have easy answers are valued and listened to, and that means these institutions and the people in them need to be okay with not knowing the answer, right? Like we're working in a profession that purports to have answers to questions that are not quite answerable.
Yeah. That are lifelong questions. And I mean, this is why I called this podcast The Erotic Philosopher.
Oh, I love the name, by the way. Yeah.
Thank you. So do I. You know, because the truth is nobody's got any fucking idea what's going on.
No.
You know, with sex and pleasure, and you know, I think individuals are the best sort of compass of satisfaction for themselves. But if they don't give themselves permission to move towards where the pleasure is, to explore it, in case they find something about themselves that makes them uncomfortable, which is inevitable, you're going to find something that makes you uncomfortable.
Hopefully. I mean, that's where else do we grow?
Yeah, and then the implication that, the discomfort is therefore bad, and that we've just got to stick to that trodden path, which is the path that would have had me married and, you know, living in the suburbs in my 20s.
Right. Outside of, you know, what you said, being known for working with kinky people and thinking outside the box, so to speak, you know, there's other work that I do. And one of them is I do like working with very old people. And I have had the privilege of not only being there when my own father died and having pretty in-depth conversations with him in the last year or two of his life, but also working with clients who were very elderly or about to die and helping them with that process, and being told time and time again by people in their 80s and 90s that, you know, there's no answer at the end. There's no sense of a neat package tied up with a bow. So if you're hoping for that, stop and start appreciating what every moment brings and being present in the moment. It doesn't get any more simple than that, but it's very hard for people who are living in the past and in the future.
Yeah.
And that's not a criticism of anyone individually. We are taught and trained to live in the past and the future. So working with a lot of old people and having these conversations about, you know, there's no prize at the end, as far as, you know, at least as far as on this side of death. I have no idea what lies on the other side of death. And I'm very curious. Someday I'll experience it. And, you know, I've never been afraid of it. And maybe that's why people who are older can talk to me about it. Yeah, it seems like people are scared of sex and death.
Yeah. I'm not afraid of death either. I think that scares people, but then I can also talk about, you know, anal fisting with the same level of glee, and
right.
that also challenges people. So,
which is the message that I consistently get from people who are older and more experienced than me, who have lived more, is that do it.
Right.
You know, really, seriously, do it. There's a great meme floating around the internet right now by Anthony Hopkins. And it's perfect for these times. None of us are getting out of here alive. So please stop treating yourself like an afterthought. Eat the delicious food, walk in the sunshine, jump in the ocean, say the truth that you're carrying in your heart like a hidden treasure. Be silly, be kind, be weird. There's no time for anything else.
Oh,
right?
That is it. Yeah, it's so true.
I've shared that with so many people because it just speaks. There's nothing about sex in there, but
no,
that's okay.
But it speaks to the same principle. And
absolutely.
I think that's the thing that, you know, our society says, you know, there's life and then there's sex as this separate thing that exists in the shadows. Death exists in the shadows. And then life is, Life is, buying a house and having a job and, having your family and having your car and your dog and, that's life. But sex and death, they're not life, they're some other thing.
And I think this is true for many people. So the goal of being a therapist, of being a healer, of being someone who provides some sort of light on whatever path a client and you are joining on, is integration, is bringing sex into your life, bringing passion and creativity, pleasure, frivolity, admitting that maybe we don't have all the answers. And perhaps nothing does, and maybe we're not supposed to have all the answers at this stage of consciousness or existence. Now, that's very more philosophical, but that's why we're on this podcast, I guess.
Exactly. And because there is these empty spaces that can't be filled, and we can't know everything. And what I do know, that I'm fairly sure about, although I'm not really sure about anything, but I am fairly sure about what I'm about to say, is that when people want to experience heightened states of consciousness around their sexuality, they're generally not looking for certainty. They're looking to be taken outside of their day-to-day experience. And you can't have that kind of heightened erotic experience if you stick with the status quo. You got to be safe, of course. You got to feel good about what you're doing. But sticking to the well-trodden path, even from a scientific point of view, we know that that's not what brings excitement. You can't eat the same meal every day, even if it's your favorite meal. You can't eat the same meal every day and still get the same kick out of it. At some point, something's got to give, and you've got to take a risk and try something different.
You can't have a transcendent or transcendental experience if you can't let go.
Exactly.
And, playing sports, having sex, meditating, taking mushrooms. These are all having a psychedelic experience. And I'm talking about criminy mushrooms or shiitake mushrooms. People, if you're searching for a transcendental experience, you can't have it if you're not going to let go. You can't play sports if you don't want to get sweaty. You can't have sex if you want to play it safe. I'm not talking about condoms and lube and, pelvic floor exercise. I'm talking about you can't have a life-changing experience without letting go. Therapy doesn't work unless you surrender.
Yeah.
It's like dominant submissive sexuality and kink. Being a submissive is very, very powerful. You can't be a submissive and not let go of control, of power, of the illusion of control or power, which is even more powerful.
Yeah. And so with that, I want to segue into your chapter in the new edition of the Principles and Practice of Sex Therapy, which is the go-to guidebook for our profession. And for the first time ever, they're including a chapter about kink written by you, David Ortman.
Indeed.
Can you give us a little overview of what's in the chapter or what your philosophy is about what you reckon therapists need to know about kink?
Well, sure. It's not unlike what we're talking about today. I mean, when I was younger, there's no way to talk about this and not bring my personal story into it. So I'm just going to. I've always been weird. I think I've always sought extreme and different sensations, both mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually, sexually. I was really awkward and effeminate boy at a time in growing up as an adolescent that it was not really cool to be gender nonconforming. And I wasn't gender nonconforming. It took a while for my therapist to help me understand that I just didn't behave like the average boy from New Jersey in the 80s. And I mean, I don't remember the first time I was called a faggot, but I think it was around fourth grade. And I think the last time was probably my junior year of college. So, and I'm not talking I was just called that word, which now I reclaim with pride, but I was told very early on that I didn't fit in and was made very aware of that. So I never had the option of thinking of getting married or moving to the suburbs or having a wife or a husband or children, because by 12, I was so traumatized. And by that point, I'd also been sexually molested, that it was very clear that being weird made me unsafe. And I couldn't but there was no other way to be. Like, I didn't know what being gay was. I've always been kind of more attracted to men sexually. I gravitate more toward masculine energy, but I've had sex with women my whole life. I don't really care about gender. It's irrelevant to me. Like, and I'm not saying that to sound super evolved, because I don't need to prove to anybody that I'm evolved. It's obvious. Sit in a room with me for 5 minutes. So I come from trauma. I come from physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. And there's times when I thought it would kill me, and it almost did. So it was either use that in some kind of positive way or let it fester and hurt me. And luckily, I had a therapist that I finally found at around age maybe 29 who really changed my life. And I tried several therapists too. And he really showed me the beauty in myself and in my oddness that I couldn't see, embrace, or love. And then I will also have to credit taking mushrooms in college when I was about 20 and had a profound psychedelic experience with friends in nature, during which I came out to myself, because I didn't know that I was gay. I was very sexually inexperienced. I didn't really know what those labels meant. I just knew that I liked boys and I liked girls, and that I'd been called names and beaten, and not just by my peers in school as a young person, as a teenager, but by teachers.
Wow.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I had a teacher call me, at least one teacher called me a faggot. So I had to use that pain for something good. I don't know why, but, psychedelics cracked open that door for me, and took a very obsessive, compulsive, depressed kid and showed him that being weird was okay, and that not conforming to something wasn't necessarily a choice I had.
Right. It
was more just, what do I do with it? So to talk about the principles and practice of sex therapy, this chapter of mine that is included at this point, it's been such a long process, such a good process, because I got to work with a psychologist by the name of Catherine Hall, who's one of the editors, and she is really just so inspiring and kind and bright. And I really didn't want to write anything more about sex, because when you write about something from a clinical perspective, or an emotional perspective, or a spiritual, academic perspective, whatever perspective, for me, it takes the joy out of doing it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
When I'm writing about sex, I'm not having it a lot. Because for me, it's overstimulating. I feel oversaturated.
Yeah, you get drenched in it. It's too much. Yeah, I agree.
This is edition number 6 that my chapter is in. And to give you some perspective, 20 years ago in grad school, my fun sex nerd reading, because we weren't talking about it in school, was the Principles and Practices of Sex Therapy, edition 3 or 4.
Yeah.
So this was my dorky, fun sex nerd reading when I was young, and to be asked to contribute a chapter in the 50th anniversary edition on a subject that they'd never talked about before is more than coming full circle.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really, and Catherine was very transparent when she asked me to do this. I said to her, I was like, there's other people who are older, wiser, more experienced than me, maybe even better writers. I'm only, at that point, I think I was 49. I was like, why me? And she said, we like your voice. We've read your work. We want you to do this. Now, I haven't heard the "we want you" a lot in this life.
Yeah.
I may look a certain way now. I may carry myself a certain way now. I may talk a certain way now. Even though that confidence is authentic now, for most of my life, it wasn't there.
Yeah.
It was something that I learned to project through, rigorous training as an actor, as a model in theater, but it wasn't authentic. So to hear someone say that they wanted me to do something at age 49 was still a new experience for me. But it felt so, I could accept it hearing it from Catherine, that they wanted a perspective. They wanted my perspective, which is going to be weird even by kinky standards.
Right.
Because the chapter doesn't start off with, here's consent, and this is what BDSM means.
Yeah.
that is one way to approach it. And when I was younger, and I think had less experience, that's what I would lead with. And there's nothing wrong with that. But what the chapter is about is power. And that power is a force, and it is present everywhere. And it is rarely, never equally distributed.
No.
You know, we may strive, or some of us may strive for equal treatment under psychological, legal, whatever conditions, institutions, and systems. But people born equal? Are people treated equally? Are we all of the same strength and intelligence? No, not at all. So if we're going to have power imbalances, and power imbalances are apparent in the most traditional / vanilla / mainstream sex, it's a dance of power. So why not use it? Kinky people and people who practice BDSM recognize that there are power differentials and play with them consciously.
Yeah, that's the distinction is, you know, the power is there, the power differentials are there, whether we like them or not. And I don't think it's wise to mute them or to try to neutralize them, because that's what takes the color out of a dynamic. But to learn how to harness that energy, and I often make a correlation that it's like electricity. You know, electricity, you know, is powering my computer right now and, you know, gives me lights in my kitchen. But if I use electricity the wrong way, I can burn my apartment down. But the electricity exists, whether I like it or not. It's how I use it that it's going to benefit me or harm me and the people around me. And that's my responsibility as a human being, to not be an asshole and to learn how to manage the power that I have or don't have in my life. And that's where, you know, for me, I get so fired up about this work around sex, is like, if we don't give people sex education, and I don't mean, you know, where do babies come from sex education. I mean, this is sex education, what you and I are doing right now. If we shy away from these conversations, we don't learn how to manage the electricity. We and this is how we burn people's houses down, because we don't take responsibility for the power that we all have and the power that we play with that can take sex from mediocre to extraordinary.
Wow, you took the words right out of my mouth. I mean, I don't talk about really what's in the chapter very much, you know, because I did sign, you know, paperwork, and, you know, it's going to be a good book, and they have every right to want to sell copies. But but yes, that's exactly what my presenting argument is that power is neutral. It's how we use it that burns the house down or illuminates the room. And the same thing with, you know, I was going to say, we're animals. Humans are animals and behave like it sometimes, in sometimes very beautiful and very horrifying ways. Aggression is a part of being human. Aggression is a part of sex. In fact, sex and aggression share, I think, maybe 10 of the same 13 physiological states. If aggression is something that is normal, how do we use it in a constructive way? You know, are we going to take our aggression out on a black jogger in Georgia and kill him? I don't think that's a really good idea. But, you know, if my aggression isn't channeled in an appropriate way and I'm not conscious of it, maybe we're all capable of that behavior. So if I can consciously channel my aggression and my darker shadow, to talk about, you know, to be Jungian about it, my shadow self, into something consensual, if I can be called a faggot and slapped around now and own it as a choice, or do the same, you know, or when I'm with a woman on either end of the whip, using words that I would not use in polite conversation, but consensually, that allows you to release or claim power, aggression, feelings of worth and unworthiness. And if you can play on that level, that's pretty amazing. And it allows our darker but normal human feelings to be exercised and exorcised. Because otherwise, what do we have? Passive aggressiveness, fear. You know, I'm sorry, it's in the news. This jogger who was killed in Georgia, and this Black Panic defense I've seen what repressed anger, rage, aggression, and hate can do. And then I've seen what people who can identify their shadow and their darker impulses, and I bring them into the light and kind of work with them consciously. I've seen the power of that work.
To dismiss the parts of us that have a tendency toward judgment, aggression, violence, to dismiss those parts and to pretend that we don't have them or to sweep them under the rug is so incredibly dangerous, because then they leak out in situations like this that are absolutely non-consensual, that are vulgar displays of power and aggression that are completely unnecessary. And we could end up in a conversation about American politics and or global politics and race politics, but the work that you do, the work that I do, is about corralling those human instinctual experiences and using the force for good rather than evil. The force is there whether you like it or not. You got to learn how to use it.
I mean, George Lucas taught us that in 1976.
He sure did. He sure did.
Right?
And I will say to clients, what else can we look at if you were willing to go towards that thing that pulls you, that sort of, is it that wildness? If you put your little toe outside the cage for a moment, what might it feel like to be outside the cage just for 10 minutes? I think a lot of people, that's scary for folks, and the bulk of the work that you and I do is like, let's put our foot outside the cage just for a second, and I'll come with you. How about that?
And I'll come with you. That is the part that makes the work.
Yeah.
Our clients are coming to us with so much, I will use the word sacred, and I'm not a religious man, trust that we will go there with them. And yes, that doesn't mean we're having sex with them. Again, I have to qualify my words because of the world we live in. And, I don't do it very often, and I want to punch myself every time I do. But yeah, we have to go with them. We can't do this work and not get our hands dirty. I expect them to experiment and think outside their limitations if we are not willing to do the same or can't model the same. And yes, you can take a pill and get an erection, and that's going to help you with your arousal, but it's not going to do anything for your desire. But most people don't even think about, is what I'm doing actually turning me on? No, it's not. Okay, let's go do something that's pleasurable. We don't teach people to think that way. To take a feather from the cap of the Kink and BDSM community, talk about some wildly in touch, sexually and erotically intelligent people.
Yes. Sex geniuses.
Sex geniuses who are not even engaging their genitals. It's all about the mind and power and this dance of giving control, taking control, because that's happening anyway. So find a way to make it fun.
Absolutely. So I fell in love with you the moment I met you, and that only increases every time I speak to you. And I wanted for this to happen, and I wanted to be able to share my love for you with the world and people listening. So how can people find your books, find your work, find you? Because you work with people all over the world, so how can they find you?
My website is davidortmann.com, just like my name, DavidOrtmann. And you can just pretty much Google my name or plug it into Amazon, and I think a list of my books or any book that I've even contributed to comes up. Oh, and the Principles and Practices of Sex Therapy. That's right. Coming out in July, edition 6. Yeah. So I'm not hard to find.
No, and you're based in New York City. You're still working in San Francisco as well, for those who want to see you in person. So, David, it's been an extraordinary and profound pleasure to have you on the Erotic Philosopher.
Thank you for saying that. You just brought tears to my eyes, honestly.
Hello, listeners. To submit an erotic quandary for the philosophers to ponder, follow the Erotic Philosopher on Instagram and Twitter at the Erotic Philos. That's PHILOS. And click on the Google form link in the bio. And to discover more about my online sexology courses, as well as how to work with me directly, head on over to cyndidarnell.com. That's CYNDIDARNELL.com. Thanks for listening.